All right, good day everyone. We're about to start today's webinar on green hydrogen, hype or hope. And I'd like to welcome everyone dialing in from Europe, where it's already afternoon, but also those joining in from the Americas, where it's still morning. This is a very interesting topic that has received a lot of attention in the past year, and we've noticed many people asking about whether this resurgence of interest towards green hydrogen is here to stay or not. So we thought it was a great moment to set up a webinar. We have two great speakers also on the line, Vishal and Luke, who I will introduce more in depth in just a moment, while I, Lorena, will be your moderator for the duration of this webinar. So let's begin with our agenda. I would like to begin first with a quick introduction on myself. My name is Lorena Nieuwenhoven, and I'm a project manager at Solarplaza, and I'll walk you through the details of this webinar. After that, I'll be happy to give the floor to our speakers. The first one, who is Vishal Shah, who will be discussing the potential of hydrogen and provide us with a cost roadmap and investment opportunities for hydrogen, and where we're headed in this market to create a framework for our discussion later on. After Vishal, we'll have Luc Graré. He will have the floor to talk about green hydrogen opportunities and also go into an analysis of LCOE costs and current applications of green hydrogen already being used today. Of course, we're happy to answer any questions that you have as an audience, so feel free throughout all the presentations to submit your questions through the software. We will go over as many as we can during the Q&A at the end of the two presentations. And after the Q&A, we will round off the webinar for today. And shortly, for those who aren't aware, I'd like to introduce you to Solarplaza. We're a company based in the Netherlands, and we're a platform for the solar industry. And our mission is to positively impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition. We do this by organizing conferences around the entire globe and connecting our network of over 60,000 PV professionals globally. And before we start, just some quick practical notes. For any technical issues, we have a support team available. So please use the chat box in the GoToWebinar sidebar if you have any problems. And any questions that you have for the speakers, please raise them in the question box. We will compile them and address them in the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. And of course, you have already the slides available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar platform, but they will also be released via email along with the recordings to all the registered attendees after the webinar is completed. So a quick introduction on Vishal, our first speaker of the day. He has a strong background in solar and finance, but is currently the managing partner and founder and CEO of Hydrogen Technology Ventures, which works on innovation and investment opportunities of decarbonizing industries. And he is also a winner of several nationally recognized awards and has been published in several news articles, and he will be our first presenter of today. Vishal, I give you the floor, and you now have freedom to give us your presentation.
Thank you, Lorena, and good day, everyone. It's good to be speaking with you. I am, running this hydrogen-focused investment firm based out of the US, but we have a global presence. Very excited to see the application of clean energy and renewable energy technologies in the field of hydrogen. So maybe I'll just introduce quickly our firm and then also talk a little bit about the sector. So as Lorena mentioned, HD Ventures invests in infrastructure and technology startups that are driving the hydrogen and fuel cell ecosystem. We have a team with direct experience in scaling technology platforms in US and international markets. Our investment strategy is focused on investing in scalable business models, and we really think that there's a massive technology transformation that is underway in the hydrogen sector with a lot of advanced solutions such as electrolyzers, next generation fuel cells, as well as low-cost storage and distribution infrastructure. Our team is experienced engineers, investors, entrepreneurs, and industry experts. So why hydrogen? If you look at what's going on globally over the last 12 plus months, there has been a significant momentum across a number of large organizations as well as a large number of countries. Hydrogen prices have come down. You have started to see a lot of discussions around how hydrogen can help decarbonize the global economy. Countries like Germany have made major announcements on the policy front to support hydrogen in the economy, and then China obviously is already on the forefront. We think that the momentum in the hydrogen sector today is unprecedented for a number of reasons. First, the global policy drive that we are seeing is extremely coordinated, and it's only going in one direction. The cost of renewable energy, particularly solar, has come down to a level where making green hydrogen today is absolutely possible. And we think that a lot of the technologies around the hydrogen ecosystem, which is fuel cells or electrolyzers, have come down to a point where costs are now very, very attractive to do large-scale projects. And plus, we are at a point where large organizations as well as policymakers are realizing that electrification is not the only holy grail. You need hydrogen as a tool to decarbonize the world. So with that, just to give you some background about where the governments are, you're seeing a lot of investing globally from governments. They're investing, close to $1 billion every year or more, an increasing number of that in Europe as well as in Asia, and also now in the US in this sector. And with that, we think that hydrogen can play a role in a number of key sectors. This is a slide from the McKinsey where it shows where hydrogen can play an increasingly attractive role, in power generation, transport, industrial energy, building heat and power, as well as industry feedstock. Now, the growth trajectory of a lot of these applications is actually going to turn out to be sooner than what we've seen. This has been the case with solar in the 2000 to 2010 timeframe. This was the case with lithium-ion storage from 2010 to 2020 timeframe, and we think the next decade, which is 2020 to 2030, is the decade of hydrogen. So where we think about investment opportunities, we have across the spectrum, both upstream through midstream and downstream opportunities that we think are going to be very attractive, from hydrogen production to storage, transport, and distribution, as well as to end users. And I'll quickly talk about hydrogen production, which is really the big focus for a lot of audience on this call, on this webinar, where renewables can be used to produce hydrogen at a point of source, which is really how the industry is evolving. Just the way that we saw distributed generation grow from almost a nothing market in 2000, 2001, when Japan and Germany were the two big markets announcing policies, we are going to see the same kind of growth, or even actually much faster in the hydrogen sector. According to this, the Hydrogen Council report from a little long ago, hydrogen demand is going to increase 10x. We think that this number could turn out to be conservative, especially given the recent policy momentum. So with that, maybe I'll talk a little bit about the case for green hydrogen and why we think this is extremely important. Well, I think before we go into some of the economics, and Luke is going to highlight a lot of what his company is doing around specific projects and cost curves, I wanted to just maybe talk a little bit about the role that hydrogen can play in integrating renewables. First, if you look at, say, for example, Germany, there will be a lot of excess power that needs to be stored, and the only way that you can effectively store that excess power is through hydrogen. As this is an example for the German market, and German government, as you probably have seen more recently, have made some announcements around this as well. If you look at the cost curve and the potential of hydrogen in storage, hydrogen storage is probably the most effective seasonal storage option today. A lot of the lithium-ion storage is less expensive, but you're probably going to run into issues after 6 and 8 hours. And a lot of other technologies out there are not going to really do the job. Hydrogen storage is probably going to be the most effective large-scale seasonal storage option that is available today. And also hydrogen can be used to bridge the supply and demand gap that we can see or expect to see increasingly in renewable space, where more and more renewables are added to the grid. So the bottom line here is that the need for hydrogen storage is only going to increase exponentially as renewable energy share continues to grow globally. And I say this because a lot of the growth that we've seen in renewables is now being supported by the growth of storage. Hydrogen storage is the next frontier in our view, and it should set the stage for a lot of developers that are thinking about green hydrogen projects. So with that, let me just talk a little bit about green hydrogen, where we are today. And really, our view is that green and renewable hydrogen is competitive today at renewable energy prices in a lot of parts of the world. If you look at this slide where you can produce renewable power for less than 40 cents, 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, today a lot of PPAs are being signed for $20 to $30 per megawatt hour in the US and in a lot of parts of the world. We think at those prices, you can effectively produce hydrogen and at a large scale for less than $5 per kilogram. And that is going to be very competitive to the traditional source of hydrogen, which is steam methane reforming. And it's actually going to be even cheaper in many cases to a lot of the traditional technologies. The roadmap that we are seeing here is quite promising, especially if you look at the cost of renewables, such as wind and solar. You can actually see hydrogen production costs way below $2 per kilogram. We think we could be seeing approaching $1 per kilogram as well. And just to maybe illustrate that, what that means in terms of the different applications, clean hydrogen fuel will be competitive in a number of sectors, transportation sectors, by 2030 timeframe. We think that this assumption is probably a bit conservative. If you look at some of the trajectory that we're seeing, particularly in heavy-duty transportation, you can actually see the growth of green hydrogen much sooner than the 2025 timeframe that a lot of experts are predicting. So what that means is you are going to see a number of a huge increase in green hydrogen projects. If you look at the electrolyzer capacity, from 2000 to 2019 timeframe, you had only about 250 megawatts of capacity, announced and installed in that timeframe. Between 2020 and 25, the last we checked, it was more than 3.2 gigawatts, and that number is going to increase exponentially as a number of large gigawatt scale projects are in the works. So we think that this number could turn out to be 2x or 3x of the current projection. And that's really because PPAs are now in the $20 to $30 per megawatt hour range. And you are seeing a lot of projects, particularly in the Middle East, in Europe, and also increasingly now actually in the US. There is a big project that is being developed right now. So what this means is, if you look at the cost roadmap, this is from the US Department of Energy, with today's electrolyzer costs of $800, which is again very high. It's probably in the 400, 500 range. You could see hydrogen cost of $4 plus or minus. That number we think is going to come down to anywhere between $2 or even less than $2 in a reasonable scenario where you can expect 40% capacity factor, $400 per kilowatt electrolyzer cost, and cost of electricity of somewhere around 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's the roadmap that we are looking at, and it's not that far. And again, another way to think about this is if you look at the curtailment that we are seeing today, a lot of the solar and wind projects are not necessarily being utilized 100% of the time. So if you take that curtailed power and if you look at what that would look like in a low cost electrolyzer, low grid prices environment, you could see a hydrogen cost of $1.32 per kilogram, which is way below the SMR cost of an average of about $2. You're seeing a significant increase in sort of the actual projections for electrolyzers and the number of projects that are going to be announced. I think that number is only going to go one way. And in terms of where we think the opportunities lie, besides the large projects, a lot of the companies that we are looking at are actually involved in improving the cost of electrolyzers, whether it's membranes or catalysts or coating, etc. So I think you're going to see a lot of improvement, just the way that solar panel prices came down. You're going to see electrolyzer costs come down, driven not only by scale, but also by technology. Platinum-free electrodes are a big focus for a lot of these, startups, and I think we're going to see, in the near term, the next 12, 18 plus months, a significant integration of a lot of these technologies into the actual projects. So our focus as a firm, besides some of these large projects, is really looking at 4 different verticals: fuel cell stacks and applications, electrolyzers and hydrogen production, carbon capture and other applications, as well as storage and distributions. We are looking at a lot of these different technologies that are driving the scale and cost reduction in the hydrogen sector. So with that, I'm going to stop here and let Luke take over, and then we can open up for questions.
Thank you, Vishal, for your very insightful presentation. Definitely, there's a lot to consider about the opportunities with hydrogen, maybe even before we reach the year 2030. But then I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Luke Graré. Luke is the Vice President Sales and Marketing at Now Hydrogen, although he also has a strong background in solar previously and over 20 years of experience in international business and strongly involved with the decarbonization of Europe. But still, I will let Luke introduce himself and introduce Now Hydrogen, and I will give him the floor.
Thank you, Lorena. Thank you, Vishal, also. So let me first give an introduction of our company. And the history goes back to 1927. Goes all the way back to a company called Norsk Hydro, a very famous Norwegian company. And at that time, the founders of this company, they had a big hydropower plant. They had also a fertilizer business. And they were thinking about, hey, how can I make green ammonia to make fertilizers? And that is how they started developing electrolyzers. So that is where it all started. So actually, Norsk Hydro was founded in 1906. And in 1927, they had these electrolyzers so far developed that they started selling these to the outside market. And that is how it all started. Yes, so see, at that time, the company was called NHEL, the H from Norsk Hydro, and the H was later on eliminated, and the company name is like this today now. In 2007, Norsk Hydro decided to sell their oil and gas related business, including the hydrogen business, to Statoil. We were done at Statoil, and then there was in 2011 a management buyout. This management buyout was joined by one famous investor from Norway, and he brought the company down in 2014 to the Oslo Stock Exchange market. This IPO was quite successful, that we had enough money to do 2 major acquisitions. One was in Denmark, a company called H2 Logic, a startup company from 2003, specialized in making fueling stations. And as you see here on the graph, the time in 2018, we built it there in Denmark. We opened the largest manufacturing plant for fueling stations. And a year later, 2 years later, after we have acquired H2 Logic, we made another big acquisition, which was Proton On-Site, a company specialized in PEM technology, PEM electrolyzers. And their history is going back to 1955, a company established by General Electric. They established this business. Later on, they became United Technologies, and then they went to be named Proton On-Site, and now it's all integrated in Nel Group. So which means today we are located on 3 areas. So I'm just pushing here forward. Seems like to be, yeah, a little bit slow, but it's okay. Oh, I go back. Sorry for this, because there's some time delay here. So we are based on 3 locations. One is in Wallingford, like I said, that is where we have our PEM technology. Then we are in Norway, in Notodon, where you see on in the middle, the left upper picture, near to a very nice lake. That is where it all started with Norsk Hydro. And we are building a complete new factory in Porsgrunn, more south of Norway, and that will be the largest alkaline production capacity which is available in the world. We will be able to build a 360 megawatt of electrolyzers based on alkaline. So what we do in this factory, we make the electrodes, cathode, anode, and that is what we do there. And then you see on the right side the picture of our factory in Denmark, in Herning, where we make the fueling stations, where we have a capacity to make 300 fueling stations per year. Now, this picture is old, but I think is a very important picture. So what we show there is one of the larger electrolyzer plants, 150 megawatt, which has been installed in Norway and which has been running about, one has been running 40 years and the other 50 years. There were 2 of them. And I think this picture is very important if you talk also about alkaline, if you talk about large scale electrolyzer. It's no science fiction, it has been done already. And the other thing important on this picture is it shows it is proven technology, it is reliable, and that makes also for banks the conclusion, yes, this is bankable technology done. So that is, let us say, and immediately come to this, where do we see the positioning? Because we have, like I said, on the on side, we have PEM, we have alkaline, and how do we position then those 2 technologies, which we further develop, and of course we further work on bringing the cost down. For the time being, we see a kind of maybe threshold point, a kind of tipping point, which is around 20 megawatt, where we see clearly a cost advantage from alkaline if you go really above this. Under this, it is also already some cost advantage, but comes really very clear above 20 megawatt. And if you go in direction of 100 megawatt, you clearly see a cost advantage of alkaline. So that is how we position this. We see, of course, PEM in the smaller installations having the advantages from being adapting very quick to the changes in volatile renewable energy, where of course alkaline might be a little bit slower. But in many cases, when customers are talking about very large scales, 100 megawatt, gigawatt, they're looking to other criteria where we talk about reliable technology, proven technology, and bankability. So I'm gonna touch on a couple of cost aspects, which Vishal also more or less also touched already on this. But we see as a manufacturer of electrolyzers as our main duty, besides bringing products which are reliable, which are safe on the market, also to work on the cost, on the capex. And you see here on this graph the dollar per kilowatt peak, and you see also the gray bar, which is today steam method reforming capex range. And as you see here, with take into account our new factory, which we are going to open in by the end of this year, latest January next year. There you see that with this new capacity, where we have a cost reduction possible, then that we are really coming in the range of SMR if you talk about capex. And of course, we will be further working on bringing down the cost and really see that we are coming at the lower end of SMR technology on capex, and probably even in the future, beating these and being lower in capex costs on that. On the other side, it is also another important aspect is the electricity price. And there are two, let us say, points which I would like to mention here. One is the fossil parity for mobility. So which means the price point at where the dollars you have to spend per kilometer driving, for instance, or 100-kilometer driving, is equivalent from a petrol car versus a hydrogen car or a hydrogen truck, whatever you want. And that is where we see when the electricity price is at around 50 euro per megawatt hour. Of course, to be fair enough, if you talk about fossil parity for mobility, and if you compare it with petrol, for instance, of course, on the petrol, fair enough, there is added lots of taxes, etc., local community tax and government tax or whatever kind of taxes. Those are not included on the hydrogen side if you talk about this fossil parity. And another point is at which level the availability of electricity has to be in order to become fossil parity for the industry. So for the feedstock industry towards the fertilizer business or the steel industry. And that is at this cost of electricity around 30 euro per megawatt hour. So we will do our job as a manufacturer of electrolyzer on the capex cost. And of course, I know that many people in the front of Solarplaza are very hard working on getting the price down of solar. And indeed, that is helping all of them to make then this hydrogen economy much more than a hope, really reality. And this is also a nice slide, and I've been working before joining Nel about 10 years in the solar industry. And I remember we had these kind of slides where it was about grid parity, in which countries the electricity price produced by solar will be the same as the grid. And I remember somewhere 10 years ago, I saw this kind of slide where I said, all red, that is where we have already grid parity. Now, this slide is not talking about the solar industry, but it's talking about in which countries we can produce green hydrogen at price levels at $1.6 per kilogram and below. And indeed, of course, these are the more sunny areas. You see there, Chile, for instance, that the north of Chile, we know this is the best place in the world probably for solar, and the south of Chile is the best place in the world for wind energy because it's the most windy place. And that is what I say. Now, if I compare this again with this grid parity slide from the solar industry, I remember somewhere 10 years ago it started like this, but then it started moving more and more up. And we see in the meantime that, of course, Germany and Netherlands, we have also grid parity in solar. So it is actually probably to be expected the same also here, that where we see now the possibility to make hydrogen at $1.6 per kilogram will be in the future moving more and more up. And we will see also where there is now red and orange, we will be seeing that we will be making at $1 per kilogram hydrogen. I will give you a couple of project examples where we signed deals and we have been working on. And one is here with Nikola in the US. As some of you might know, Nikola is an American company, started making an electrical truck, and now they are really committed to make a hydrogen truck. Couple days ago, they made an announcement that they will be on the Nasdaq stock exchange market. So we have made with them an agreement to deliver near to a gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity over the coming years, which will be used in fueling stations for trucks. So there will be 8-ton per day fueling stations, also some 16-ton per day fueling stations. And so we will be supplying the alkaline electrolyzer they will be using, and then also our fueling station technology. So Nikola, they have in the meantime already signed in for the delivery of 14,000 trucks, and they took this as a pre-order. You'll probably see the first trucks beginning 23 on the roads in the US. And through their cooperation with Iveco, they also committed to bring their technology to Europe. Another one, sorry, that was too quick. Another one is Hyundai, who is working in Switzerland, active to start delivering their hydrogen trucks. And we have signed there with a daughter company of H2 Energy company, Hydrospider AG in Switzerland, a frame contract for the delivery of 30 megawatt of PEM electrolyzer, and the first 2 megawatt we have already delivered. And then there will be further scaling up, as you see here, to 80 megawatt in order to produce enough green hydrogen to let about 1,600 trucks running in Switzerland. Another very nice application, also in mobility, is an agreement we have signed with Transport for London, where we have received a first 2.5 million euro contract for the delivery of a fueling station solution. And they will be running about, in the first step, about 20 hydrogen of these double-deck buses in London. And we will be supplying the fueling station and also the electrolyzer technology to make the green hydrogen. And this gives a possibility that those double-deck buses can be filled with hydrogen within 5 minutes time. And I think that the opportunity is huge, knowing that there are 9,000 buses alone in London, and there are plans to make them also zero emission by 2037. Another application, not in mobility, but then in the feedstock for the steel industry, where, as you see, hydrogen is used to take the oxygen out of the ore. And we have signed here an agreement with SSAB. The project is called Hybrid, together with Vattenfall, for the delivery of a first pilot of 4.5 megawatt. That's an alkaline electrolyzer. And if that's all successfully, that will be massively scaled up and will be really very big. And knowing also that the CO2 emissions from the steel industry in Sweden is counting for 10%, and we talk about a handful of companies there, the impact could be huge. And I think just to give you an impression about the huge potential there is, I talked about that we are going to open a new factory where we can build 360 megawatt per year on electrolyzers. And you see there the small dot what is 360 megawatt is, but you see beside the green and the blue big dots what potential there is in the steel industry and also in the ammonia industry, for instance, used for the fertilizer business. So that shows that the potential is enormous. And another order which we have signed, which we have announced, is for the mining industry, where you know these kind of very big trucks, 5-6 meters high trucks. And in South Africa, a company called Anglo-American, who is having their mining activity done, they have decided to refurbish one of these trucks to let it run on fuel cells, electrical motors on, and together with on hydrogen. So these 3.5 megawatt, that is only to fill one truck and let one truck run a whole day in this mining activity. So and if that's successful, the potential for this only one mine in South Africa of Anglo-American is an electrolyzer capacity of about 100 megawatts. And of course, also here again, there is the opportunity to build and also at least the same capacity in renewable energy. And I think these are ideal spots again for the solar industry, and that is where we believe that there is a good alliance possible between the solar industry and what we are doing here. So that brings me to the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke, for the comprehensive presentation you shared with us. It's really interesting to see the applications, particularly in the transport sector, that are where hydrogen can have the biggest impact. But now I guess we are reaching our Q&A session, and I would like to invite the audience to also keep submitting questions throughout the Q&A time, and we will still be able to see them because we already have gotten quite a few during the presentations. So I think I will begin with a question that was posed during Vishal's presentation, and it was asked, at what pace do you anticipate hydrogen demand growth in the African markets? And I also believe in the global map, Africa was quite dark in terms of red, so it seems like there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. So I believe that the African market shows a lot of great potential. The key there is not so much going to be the actual green hydrogen production, but the transportation of hydrogen from, say, Africa to markets like whether it's Europe or some other places in Asia. And I think that technology, we think is going to be the key bottleneck. I would say that there are a number of different initiatives that are underway, whether it's liquid hydrogen, whether it's LOHC technology, or using other sort of methods to transport hydrogen. But we think that that's going to be the key bottleneck for growth. Our view is that between now and 2025, the African market is going to be a meaningful producer of hydrogen. So it's sort of maybe it's going to be a slow start until some of these technologies get ready to transport hydrogen outside of Africa. Within the African continent, there are clearly opportunities also to decarbonize certain, mining and other industry operations, and that's probably going to be the first, step for a lot of the initial applications for hydrogen.
All right, thank you, Vishal. That's true. Maybe it will take some more time for it to catch up with the technologies being used in Europe, but definitely a lot of potential. But I do have another question right now. And the question is to Luke in particular, how to tackle the problem that hydrogen production costs go down with higher volumes, while initially with innovation, you will start with low volumes and increase this step by step. Who should take the initiative? So I guess it's primarily a question about how will you reduce these costs?
Yeah, and I think especially now talking for Europe, there is lots of help, financially help on these from local governments, also from EU funding. There is a whole range of funding available, from starting just to make a first of a kind pilot installation in a certain country, in a certain sector. There are subsidies available on the capex side, but also on the opex side when you want to do something to decarbonize. But because of what you're doing, the innovation, it's a higher cost than what a grey alternative would cost today. Also, this is subsidized, and like I said, country by country specific. There are a whole number other sets of potential subsidies. So I think that this is pretty well covered in today's world, that this whole business can take off.
All right, thank you for that. And I want to jump on straight on to our next question. It was during Vishal's presentation, if I'm not mistaken. It was about the PPA prices that you mentioned. And the question is, the values mentioned for PPA are usually with load factors of around 30% wind onshore and 20% in solar PV. And the €5 per kilogram cost of hydrogen is it considering that load factor, or is it considering high load factor with PPA electricity cost?
That's a great question. And the answer is, it is considering the solar PV load factor. So this is assuming that, the electrolyzers are not going to run 100% of the time. Now, if you were to add whether it's storage or, maybe a hybrid of solar and wind, I think you could potentially actually even increase the capacity factor for electrolyzers and bring the cost down. But the $5 to $6 number that I was talking about is based on the existing load factors.
All right, thank you. Then I will jump on to another question similar to the one about Africa, actually. It's asking whether hydrogen makes economic sense in countries like Colombia, where there are lots of hydropower and cheap energy prices already. And so would hydrogen storage help to introduce more renewable energy systems like PV and wind? I guess either one of you could answer this question.
Yeah, maybe I can take it very quick. Indeed, Colombia hydropower. Yes, we are involved in a couple of developers of projects in the region there, and especially indeed hydropower. We understood also that in certain regions there is an excess of hydropower, and that is where then those developers are trying to set up then a plant to make green hydrogen. Yes.
All right, and well, then looking here at my other questions, there's one that I actually hear quite often, and I think it's Vishal briefly mentioned this topic. It's the question is it really realistic to use hydrogen with all the losses and efficiencies, or use electrification directly? And I think, Vishal, you mentioned something about the electrification not necessarily being the holy grail it is perceived to be, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the efficiencies of hydrogen and maybe when it's not efficient. I'll let you guys take it on.
Yeah, I can start maybe, and Luke, if you want, you can maybe add.
Yeah.
Look, I think electrification is clearly gaining a lot of steam and momentum, but I don't think you can electrify, a significant portion of the transportation sector, which emits a lot more emission, which constitutes a lot of carbon emissions. Same can be said about the heavy industry, steel, mining operations. So when talking about trucks, buses, marine transportation, aviation, as a fuel, hydrogen is probably the most attractive option to decarbonize some of those segments. And even natural gas, I think if you can sort of blend hydrogen in the gas infrastructure, I think there is a potential to reduce the carbon footprint. So while light duty transportation is probably going down the path of electrification, and even there, I think that there are questions around what happens in a autonomous world when refueling times matter, and battery charging takes a lot longer. So when you have a robo-taxi fleet, for example, I think it's sort of more efficient to have a hydrogen economy as opposed to an electrified fleet. But those are some of the things that are going to come into consideration going forward. But a lot of other transportation segments, as well as heavy segments, need hydrogen as opposed to electrification.
Maybe if I can add on these then, and maybe as an example in the industry, the steel industry. So today in the steel industry, they use cokes, and the cokes is used to make the heating process to melt the ore, but also at the same time to reduce the oxygen in the ore, because that is necessary to get pure steel. And what is happening then is, from the cokes, the sea is combining with the oxygen and is in this way taking out the oxygen out of the air, but that creates then CO2. So these are the emissions which we exactly do not want. Now, if you go to an electrification process, of course, you can say, yes, okay, I use electricity to heat up the furnace and to make the melting process of the steel. Okay, that works. That is already proven technology. But then you're sitting still with the issue from how do I get the oxygen out of the ore to reduce this oxygen? And that is where then hydrogen comes in place. Because if you feed on your furnaces where there is the hot melting ore, then actually with the hydrogen will be combining with the O from the ore, and you get H2O. So you get an actually water vaporization. That is what you get. So therefore, certain processes in the industry you cannot do alone by going with electrification. You need to look in the processes, and that is where also hydrogen comes into place.
All right. Yeah, I feel like those are quite cohesive answers, and nice to see that you're both aligned on the answers as well.
One of the points I would make, Lorena,
yes.
on that front, just, even within the power sector, renewables clearly are decarbonizing the grid, but you cannot assume that renewables are going to be 100% of the grid. There is the intermittency, that problem that needs to be solved, especially for seasonal storage, right? So with grid and with renewables and storage, you can solve, for a high penetration rate, but you cannot get to 100%, and that's where you still need hydrogen.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I agree with that. Then I will move on to our next question. Now it's in particular to Luke about the difference between alkaline and PEM electrolyzers. So the question is that for at least large-scale projects, the now choice is to go alkaline. However, there are some manufacturers claiming that the PEM may be more advantageous for a number of reasons. Apparently, in particular, that they can be scaled up to large-scale projects to 100 megawatts or more. And this has to do with the technology energy density, saying that the PEM would have a lower footprint and less area would be needed for the same capacity. And I guess the question here is your opinion on that.
Yeah, so indeed, if you talk about footprint, absolutely, PEM requires a smaller footprint, and it all really depends on the application. Indeed, when we talk here about a 100 megawatt project with very limited footprint, it doesn't fit for alkaline. Yeah, there is no other choice than to go for PEM. We have to take into account the higher capex for the time being. But I would say PEM and alkaline will be further developing, and we will be developing, and other manufacturers will be further developing, and both will be coming further down in cost. Probably alkaline will also be working on reducing the footprint. Probably will be working also on getting the reactiveness on the volatility of the renewable energy sources improved, etc. And where I said about these 20 megawatt tipping point, yes, of course, this might be moving over time. Maybe in a couple of years from now, we might be seeing that this tipping point is 100 megawatt, for instance, that we say, okay, everything below 100 megawatt is maybe ideal for PEM. Maybe at that time, we will be talking at gigawatt scale projects also already. And there we might be maybe looking to alkaline, again, depending from the application. If it is, for instance, a gigawatt plant somewhere in the Middle East to make green ammonia and to bring these on the boat to Europe, and the green ammonia, the electrolyzers being fed on by solar energy then. I think that we might be seeing them, because the footprint is no issue, maybe the lower capex, we might be seeing gigawatt scale electrolyzers using alkaline technology. But other cases, maybe if we talk about a very large plant on a boring platform for offshore wind, maybe due to restrictions or whatever in this application, and then that particular one, maybe we might be seeing their PEM more in future. So I think that is how we have to view this. Huh?
All right. Thank you for your answer. I guess the next question is also a little bit about more technical applications of hydrogen. It's actually a question about if there is an issue with physically storing hydrogen in consideration of the dimension of the H2 molecules. And the question continues on to ask whether hydrogen storage devices intrinsically suffer from leaks. I don't know who would be able to take on this question, or maybe if any of you could. I guess a little bit of the more on the practical side, is then storing hydrogen still plausible? What are the risks?
Yeah, I think, I can maybe take a stab at that, Luke, if you want to add. Please feel free to do so. But, there are hydrogen storage projects announced as we speak, we can actually store hydrogen in salt caverns, and underground salt caverns are the most practical way of storing hydrogen today. And I think that this technology, there are a lot of other technology options being considered, but it's a little early stage. I don't think that we have seen a lot of examples like that, but certainly something that has been done before.
All right. Thank you. I think that answers the question. And actually now I have a question going back to a previous answer. I believe, Vishal, you mentioned about the intermittency problem, dealing with the curtailment issues of solar and wind. The question is, if hydrogen production is used for balancing peaks, then production hours of electrolyzers would go down. Isn't that a problem in not having enough production hours for return of investment?
Yeah, so look, I think that you are going to design a system that is going to, optimize the electrolyzer operation, the efficiency or the capacity factor of electrolyzers. But I think what happens is you have this balancing issue, which creates an opportunity for, reducing the electricity cost. And I think a lot of the electricity which is curtailed or could be wasted could now be used to actually generate incremental revenue, which is something that is sort of an opportunity in our view, right? And so I wouldn't say that today I think you're designing a system 100% on curtailed electricity or just the balancing load, but it's going to be one of the inputs into the electrolyzer system. I don't know, Luke, if you have anything else that you want to share.
Yeah, I think we have been seeing project developers working on pure grid balancing projects, but I have to say that none of them I saw materializing so far, and I think indeed it's very difficult on the financial modeling. But of course, I think the opportunity to do a combination and to try to catch them also on this grid balancing, that is probably the right way to do, and that is where we see a couple of developers working on, and I think they will be successful in materializing these projects. So I think on pure grid balancing, I think very difficult for the time being, but a combination and take this into your financial modeling, that makes sense.
And I would say that the Department of Energy in the U.S. is actually conducting pilots and demos specifically around curtailment, projects around curtailment. So there is a lot of work being done to really try to find the right right kind of development option over here.
Okay, yes, thank you, Vishal and Luke. I think I still have some more minutes to take maybe one or two questions more, if that's all right with you guys. And then just know that if there are any questions that went unanswered for our people listening in, they can still reach out to me or reach out to Vishal and Luke with their particular questions, and hopefully we will try to get back to you, just so you're aware that you can do that. But let me try to see if I can get a few more questions in. I actually do have a question about the cost competitiveness that I believe it was Luke who presented about that it could be hydrogen could be around $1 to $2 per kilogram in the near future. The question here is then, how do you think that the cost of hydrogen transportation will evolve? Would it be in the form of liquid hydrogen or as ammonia?
Yeah, I think this is probably today the $1 billion question. There are several companies which are involved in big transportation of bulk fuel, working on these, what probably the best is. And of course, liquefaction might look very obvious, but it has also some tricky things that over a long time to keep it liquefied, you will lose energy also in this. So that is an issue which is not solved today. I think I see a number of projects where they are thinking about on green ammonia, especially when you produce somewhere remote green hydrogen, to say somewhere in North Africa or the Middle East, and you bring it to green ammonia. You can bring the green ammonia on the market. It's a merchant product which is available, which you can buy, and not especially as green, but today you can buy as a gray product. And so it really depends on the markets. But we see for the time being the ammonia case to transport probably on the winning side. But of course, not to underestimate, for transportation is also very simple through pipe, because the hydrogen pipe is also a fraction of the cost versus the high voltage electricity wiring. And there are studies done, and they talk about 7 to 8 times cheaper to transport the same energy density. So we will be seeing in Europe, and especially if we talk about Netherlands, Gazini has already announced this. They even put a number on this, that it will cost them 1.5 billion euro to upgrade the pipe network in Netherlands to produce 100% hydrogen. That is not really a big cost. So we will be seeing on the continent in the future probably much more the transportation via pipe as most obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to maybe add one other thing here, and I agree with Luke. I think that this is probably one of the largest focus areas for the industry as far as the growth of the scale of sector is concerned. And this is where a lot of the technologies that we are looking at come into play. As Luke mentioned, there are, broadly speaking, 3 or 4 different options that are being considered, from liquid hydrogen to actually using the existing gas infrastructure to transport hydrogen, and then just trying to modify hydrogen or maybe using it as ammonia. I think there are a lot of technologies that can improve the overall cost of transportation and address some of the other challenges, whether it's safety or other issues that that come into consideration. And so, while there is going to be a lot of technology and infrastructure spending happening in scaling the sector, I think there is also a lot of work being done in bringing new technologies to solve this problem.
All right, thank you to the both of you. I will now wrap up this webinar. But first, I want to know whether Vishal or Luke, if you have any final remarks to give to our audience.
I would say the question here of this webinar was hype or hope. Mm-hmm. I would say, as a conclusion, it's getting reality, and it's getting already more than hope. It's getting reality.
Yeah, look, I think it's the same. I think it's the same message, and particularly as I've seen the evolution of the solar sector, I think the opportunity here is, by far even more significant than solar, because solar was really looking at, you're looking at one market, which is power generation. Over here, you're looking at transportation and heavy industries along with power. And for a lot of the developers, really moving up the value chain from selling, electrons to molecules and chemicals, and it's really not that very complex to do that. So yeah, I think it's a much bigger opportunity in my view.
Well, with that, I would really like to thank you then, Vishal, for your participation, and you, Luke. I believe this was very informative. And it's really about turning then this, well, what used to be a hype into a reality, as you mentioned, Luke, and that the technology is there, much like the picture you showed, the technology is reliable. And I guess the question now is about scaling up and reducing costs, which, at least from a renewable energy perspective, those costs are already going down dramatically. So it's only about the sky is the limit in this sense. And I would like to close off this webinar and thank everyone who joined and listened in. I invite you to keep an eye out on our Solarplaza website and newsletters for more upcoming content on this topic and future conferences and events, and perhaps a webinar, green hydrogen event in the near future. But for now, thank you so much for joining in, and have a nice end to your Thursdays.